Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. Now, this one is going to be a dark raid event, and it is going to be against Mead or Need. I don't really know how her name is pronounced. All I know is that, given that she is Dark Element, White is going to have an advantage. Anybody that's seen my videos already know how that's going to go down, and that does indeed confirm I will clear Heroic. My white grid is way too powerful not to clear Heroic, so you'll see a Heroic video pop up. Now, it's a raid event, meaning it's not going to repeat. Keep that in mind. I say this because I'm not fully sure about it, but raid events later down the line, just not this one, they'll end up having final limit break weapons. That is a long time away from now, but if I remember correctly, they will indeed have final limit break weapons for raid events. It's probably not going to happen until ultimate limit break weapons pop up. If you're wondering about that, I've got another video that kind of explains it. But anyways, these raid event weapons tend to have 2 skills now. That is a fact. So newer players might actually get some use out of it. They should get use out of the Adoan period point blank. In worst case, you can fodder the stuff for like weapon shards or skill experience. In the case of Adoan, you can sell her for orbs. But raid events tend to give you a lot of extra stuff if you grind out the gacha tickets, so it's pretty much recommended to overfarm so you get even more out of it. Also, for those of you that don't know or haven't really experienced it, there is a sound issue on the global version. I don't know if it's Nutaku only, but apparently they're claiming that Google Chrome is behind it. If you ask me, I honestly doubt that, because I've heard some people have issues without using Google Chrome because they use something like Microsoft Edge. So the Nutaku devs are looking into it. Hopefully it'll get fixed at some point, but either way, just sit tight and hope for the best on that one, because if you want my honest opinion, there's been so much stuff with the Nutaku side that it's honestly expected for them to screw up now. But anyways, that's something that's being looked into, and they have indeed put a post about that. Now, getting into the event itself, these raid events tend to have storyline stuff as well. So there's only one storyline fight, and looking at it, it's about on par with the epic quests. So it is extremely easy to take on. Now, if you've seen a previous video I've done, you can do epic quests at about 6,000 combat power, which is like literally just the characters leveled up, and that's it. You don't even need weapons. So that's how incredibly easy epic quest really is. If you know what you're doing, you can do it as soon as that. So I don't usually cover these. She does have 400,000 HP, which is more than I normally see in those fights, but 400,000 HP is nothing at this stage of the game, because you can easily get like weapons and add-ons in order to really push yourself well past that point. You'll easily start taking out millions, guys. It's not that hard. But because it's a raid event, do expert to get materials for Ragnarok and Ragnarok Plus. You have to clear Ragnarok Plus in order to have access to Heroic, and they recommend 75,000 combat power for Heroic. You don't need that much. If you have the proper tools and weapons and whatnot, you should be able to take on Heroic. You will need certain characters for it. It should help you out if you have certain characters for it. And I can easily say out the gate, please, for the love of God, have Michael for this, because the way this boss is set up, you'll want Michael. You'll easily want Michael. It would also help if you had some other characters as well, like Light Athena, but Michael is definite must. Like, if you don't have Michael, you're probably going to be in a very bad position. Now, as for the fights themselves, this is how it works. There's a specific count mechanic on her, and it stacks. It stacks up to 5, and it's actually upping her damage output the higher the count. Now, the way this is set up, her burst, which people also call ODs or overdrives, when she bursts, it increases her count. She also does it right at the start of the fight. When you burst, it removes some of that count. However, she will counterattack by dealing damage to you. So, in a way, burst is a way to try and remove the overall damage she does to you. But be prepared when you burst, because you will still get smacked either way, and it's AoE. She has a lot of AoE through her triggers, and her own bursts are random hits. So you see why I say have Michael, but that also implies having somebody that can possibly cover and tank all of those hits, like Kingu or White Athena, or even Rom. Rom is very good in these type of situations because she does both and does it extremely well. So Rom's going to probably be the soul to use for this if you have access to her. If you don't have Rom, you can still use Joan. You just won't have the cover mechanic. Now, as for the attacks themselves, normal mode, random 3 hits, and it ups her count by 2. Raging, random 5 hits, and it ups her count by 2. Now, at the start of the fight, she'll give herself a count of 2, the immediate first action. So you won't even get hit the first turn. So use that to think about what you're trying to do. And if I remember correctly too, you cannot remove these buffs without bursting. So you have to burst. Speaking of which, if she's not bursting, it's going to be AoE damage every time on a normal attack. She really loves AoE damage. So be very prepared for that. It is best to have defense buffs and dark resistance that can last for multiple turns. Again, Michael really helps with that one. So if you have that, then you'll have some pretty decent protection. Now, when it comes to any of these triggers, depending on how many of your characters burst at once, it's how much the count drops by. However, I don't necessarily know this for sure without actually doing the fight, but it may be stronger damage the more people burst. So you have to have a little bit of balance. Honestly, if you have a decent amount of damage cut and protective buffs, you may not even have to worry about getting hit so hard with these. You just time it. In fact, most triggers take priority over the enemy burst as well, so if she's at full orbs, you can pretty much have her pass up a turn and just have her buff stacking get reduced. So timing can be the key here. But if one person bursts, it removes one of those stacks. If 2 people burst, it removes 2 stacks, and so on and so forth. Self-explanatory. She has 3 orbs before she bursts, and an HP value of 7.2 million on expert. Now, when it comes to Ragnarok, it's generally the same thing, except for she has more than double the HP. It's like 15 million. So that's something to know. And then it is 72 million when it comes to Ragnarok Plus. However, she will put 3 stacks of that buff instead of 2 at the start of the fight in Ragnarok Plus. Be very careful with that, because again, the more stacks she has, the more damage she's dealing overall. It is going to be very dangerous if you do not be careful. And then on top of that, there is a heroic fight where there's actually 2 other enemies that aren't even part of the previous battles. They just tossed them in here. So in the case of heroic, the first enemy, 75 million HP. This is already quite a lot compared to previous heroics, because you're going to be taking out almost 300 million total. But her gimmick is the fact that she's going to increase her triple attack probability throughout different parts of the fight. And it's generally just a rush to try and take her out before she starts hitting you too hard. Plus, when you burst, she likes countering that as well. It says it's going to give her a permanent buff that can't be erased, so try not to burst on the first one unless you know you're going to kill her. But something that will really help in this fight would easily be any characters that can reduce the combo rate, because you can counterbalance that a little bit. I don't know if you can remove these buffs though, so that's something to know. The whole gimmick of this entire event is pretty much enemies that love stacking buffs on top of themselves. Now, they don't have anything posted here for her raging, I don't even know why, but her normal mode is going to hit you 5 times randomly. Now, the second fight in Heroic, 10 million more HP to deal with. And it is going to be attack power buff stacking instead of triple attack. And then near the end, she's going to end up having spread to herself, so it's going to start really trying to push out a whole bunch of damage. And when she does her normal burst, it's going to be AoE, and it's going to remove 20 of your burst gauge. So apparently these two do not like you bursting, so try to avoid doing that. Honestly, if you feel like your defenses is high enough, you can forego Rom and just go with Paracelsus. It's hard to pronounce her name, but she'll be very good for this type of situation. And then it says plus question mark for how much she stacks for the boss, for how much she stacks out the gate on herself. But there are two very dangerous things about this fight. First off, she has 95 million HP now. And second, she's not only bursting more often herself, but it's going to add more stacks per burst. So if you're not careful, she can very quickly get to that max stack. So be very, very careful about that. It's still random 3 hits, it's still random 5 hits for raging, but it's 3 stacks of the buff in normal, 4 stacks of the buff in raging. And on top of that, she's going to likely put at least 3 out the gate, even though they don't have anything right here. And the fact that she has 2 orbs, just like the previous 2 enemies, is going to be much, much more frequent. So you definitely want to heal her. Now then, they say first wave attack power itself is not high, but it makes you use some pretty continuous attacks. If you stack your attack down debuffs, then it's not going to be much of a threat. Rom's good for that. Rom's good for that. If you're using Rom and Soul, you've already got the attack down limit right there. So, something to really know about that one. Now, the second one, it says a use of a red ability. So, unfortunately, that's going to counter against Rom's attack power debuff. You still can use Souls. So, if you can get blue frame debuffs, then you're still pretty good. Caspar is actually pretty good for that, considering that she can sit up and use 2 blue skills if you have her. One would be a 30% attack and defense drop. The other would be Snatch Third in her EX slot, where it's just blue skill, it doesn't do damage, it's just going to add stacks of Snatch just without having any triggers. So avoid using red skills in the second fight. That's what it's saying right here. Now, in the third fight, again, if you can suppress her buff stacking, then you're good to go. If you can't, you're going to have a problem. You will want to try and burst as quickly as you can, though. So remember that. And they also suggest us collect this because of the whole healing thing and whatnot, with some defensive buffs and getting some cure bottles as well, which is pretty much potions. But if you have Michael, or even if you pull Anna hit, who is going to be a limited Kamihime, I'll cover her in a second. But if you get them, it's going to really help you out with this fight. So that's something to know. I would also suggest possibly having Frey awakened, because of the fact that she can also feed a lot of burst gauge and then give you some pretty strong buffs, honestly. Especially when it comes to raging mode. So it depends on who you have and what you try to use, but don't go too offensive, because remember, you have to protect yourself whenever you burst. So that's something to really know. Soul and Michael is a must. If you don't have Soul, hopefully a different healer. You absolutely need a healer for these fights. There's no winning any heroic without a healer. And as per usual, the more divine and devil souls you get from the event, the more stuff you get. I don't even go over this list anymore, because of the fact that my suggestion, get 300 of both. Now, I know it is very, very tedious to grind those things out, but those 1/10 SSR tickets are a free, guaranteed SSR pool when you get enough of those. It is one of the only 2 ways to get free SSRs guaranteed. The only other way is to grab enough Dragonic Eyes, and that's typically a waste because you want those eyes for other things. So this is basically the best method of free guaranteed SSR pools. So do that, grind out as much of the event as you possibly can anyways, because even after you get your 300 of each, you could still pull gacha tickets. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of them for the raid gacha where you can just possibly get magic jewels. This is the best time to get the plus weapons and plus add-ons if you want to try and up your base stats a little bit more. You may also get some SSR dupes as well, which can lead to more orbs and more weapons. This is the best time to overfarm an event because of all the stuff they give you. So that's something to know. Now then, as for what you are getting from the event, this is why I say this add-on is pretty good, because summoning her is a dark attack buff, and something that not everybody knows is the fact that elemental buffs, like, well, debuffs too, but elemental buffs and debuffs affect the debuff rates of characters. What that means is, if you have a dark attack up buff, it's going to increase your chances of landing debuffs on enemies. It won't matter for the characters that have guaranteed chances of landing it, so don't worry about them too much. But any dark characters with a dark elemental attack buff has got an increased chance of landing debuffs. This has been tested out, so that's something to know. And on the reverse side, if you hit a enemy, like say a dark enemy, with a dark attack debuff, then their chances of debuffing you is decreased. I point this out because I've recently talked to some union members about it as well, because they find it interesting how I'm not really getting debuffed from Dark Ragnarok Catastrophe all that much. It's because of this mechanic. It stacks with stuff like Vicissitudes of Fortune. So if you have debuff resistance and like debuff chance increase and all of that, you will want some elemental buffs in order to complement that and really up your chances. That alone makes a lot of these elemental buffs pretty worth it, and that's part of the reason why they're kind of rare. Because if you really think about it, you'll find attack and defense ones more than the elementals. Now, speaking of elemental, this is where that wouldn't be affecting your debuff rates. The I don't effect where you have our main slot is 40% elemental attack. This doesn't up your debuff rates. You have to have it through buff form, not through I don't effect. But she also gives dark characters 20% more HP. So essentially 20% defender and 40% more elemental attack. Now, the weapon itself. That's more assault and more defender. It is large assault, small defender. Starting off, these are actually pretty good. Later on, you'll want to replace them with weapons that can final break. So keep that in mind. They both have decent stats too, so that's really not too bad. Like, their base stats are pretty good. Now, when it comes to the other weapon that may or may not have any use for somebody, this SR gun, which is wind. Maybe newer players might have at least some use for it, but with the sheer amount of SSR that you can really get access to very quickly, I wouldn't worry about it. But double skill SR are probably the only ones you'll want to use at this point, if any. I would say SSR are the ones to go for because, again, higher frequency of them compared to before. You can grind a whole bunch of them out when you get to ultimate catastrophes. You can even leech somebody else's raid for that. You really don't need to use SR weapons anymore. You really don't. So, that said, you can ignore this, but that's probably the only SR weapon that would be worth using, if any, only because of the fact that it comes with 2 skills. So, that's something to really point out there. As for the event missions, they haven't really changed too much. It's still the usual stuff. Clear Ragnarok with Thunder element this time, though. Everything else is just souling. You do have to soul expert with Kamihime. This is like one of the few times you will really be forced to use Kamihime because you won't really use them too much in other stuff, except for maybe Tower. That does not mean not to level them, because I've explained that in another video that I will be posting not long after this. There's going to be a mechanic that will make you want to level up your characters. All of them, even the ones you don't use. I'm just giving a hint to that one. They're working on a mechanic for that. So yeah, something to really look forward to. Now, they mentioned Anna hit, and I don't know if they even have her posted right here. No, I'm going to have to go into the SSR character page. So, she's a limited Kamihime. I'm saying that right now. You may not pull her, but she will come back. It's not like the crossover ones where you have little to no chance of ever seeing them again. She will come back through like different seasonal cycles and whatnot. So if you don't get her, don't worry about it. You'll have more chances with her down the line. It's just the fact that because she's limited, it's a little bit of a time frame in order to try and get her. So that's something to really pay attention to. Besides, if you're really going to try and do anything, save up for a crossover Hime that should be on her way within the next month or two I'm looking at. So, but this one is still pretty good. And this is a reason why. She's going to up the ability performance and the combo rate depending on the number of candies on allies. She also gives a barrier based on the number of candies on allies. She also gives light resistance down based on the number of candies on all allies. And she's also upping her burst gauge. Now, I don't know if the first one's AoE burst gauge to everybody, but either way, burst gauge increase is always pretty nice. Light has a lot of characters that have access to either increasing their own gauges or everybody's, so that's something to really pay attention to. But the main thing with this is the fact that the more candies are on everybody, the stronger she's going to get. But it's going to take like 5 stacks of candies in order to get everything, assuming nobody loses any. And unfortunately, you're only going to get 3 stacks without bursts, at best. So you will have to burst at least twice in order to do that. Each candy will last for 12 turns. So that's something to remember. But her whole thing is just a special candy type buff that will make her effects even stronger. And that barrier is actually pretty high. Now, when it comes to her second ability, it deals more damage based on the candy count, and an 8 times multiplier is actually very strong. For comparison, Medea has a 10 times multiplier. So yeah, expect a lot of damage when the candies start racking up. Also, her light resistance is in a unique frame because of the fact that it is not time based, it is turn based. Because of that, it's only going to be for you when you use it in raids, but it does mean it will stack with irises. So between the two of them, you will have 50% light attribute down. Keep this in mind because Guardian Plus is going to have a mechanic centered around some of that type of stuff, at least for a while anyways. So you're going to, if you get her, you're going to want to use her for Artron Plus, most likely, because of that. And I say this because we are going to get Phallag Plus pretty soon. I think it's actually the same time as this event, so be prepared for that for anybody that's got their water teams ready. Now, as for her barrier, it starts off at 1,000. It's okay. It's pretty decent. 1,000 barrier is still more helpful than you would think because remember, you can still have defense buffs and damage cuts and elemental resistances and stuff like that. It's a 3,000 AoE barrier when it's at full power. For comparison, a Tum gives that to one person out the gate. So it's like an AoE a Tum barrier. It doesn't give the extra buffs like a Tum does, but 3,000 barrier is actually quite a lot for this game. Because as far as I remember, the strongest barrier is 5,000. So, and the fact that it is an AoE barrier of 3,000 is very good. It can even be redeployed pretty quickly too, because it's got a 4-turn cooldown and a 4-turn duration. So it can be up practically the whole fight if someone doesn't get hit. That's what makes this very, very powerful. She is a very strong barrier maiden, so that's going to give you quite a lot of protection throughout the entire fight. And then, like I said, her assist ability is going to end up giving you more ability damage and more combo rate based on the number of candies. So make sure you store quite a lot of those. Her whole main gimmick is to really stack up candies. You won't hit maximum stacks without maintaining burst along with the ability itself. But if you do get her, by all means use her. She is pretty good at maintaining some things. So that's something to really pay attention to. The barrier alone is already quite good because I've already used Arrow's Awakening with Michael in order to really cut down damage in dark fights. And then you can even use something like Caspar to go even further with that and maybe a damage cut. This is just even more protection on that. You can be very, very tanky if you know how to use your buffs well and stack them with each other. So, that said, this barrier is going to be very great. Especially in that heroic, because that heroic, you're going to get hit AoE a lot. So, again, if you pull her, congrats, you have a very good Kamihime for that fight. I'd say you have a very good Kamihime in general. She's not top tier, don't get me wrong, but she is pretty strong for what she does. And then on top of that too, she's also used for staff and glaive combinations of characters. So if you are trying to get either one of those for a Lucent setup, then she would play a decent role in either one. It's just the fact that a lot of Lucent setups aren't all that great in neither of those two types of weapons. So unfortunately, you have to work with what you have, because if you really want to use Lucent, then you're kind of stuck with whoever's on the roster. But my suggestion is to not really worry about losing too much anyways, unless you really know you can make a lot of use out of it. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon because, like I said, you're going to see me clear Heroic. My white grid is way too strong to lose to pretty much any dark content in the game right now. I might even be able to solo Aratron Plus when it comes out. That's how strong that grid has become. But, I will have a Heroic fight. I'll probably record it the, first day of the event. It depends on when I decide to grind the event because I don't immediately grind them sometimes. Also, expect another video pretty soon, not too long after this one. It's going to have a whole bunch of sneak peek content. Like I said, it's going to have some stuff like the, like looking at the Guardian Plus raids, the malicious raids. It's going to have, I didn't have it on screen because it's still some stuff that was announced from the summit, but some other interesting things that they're adding to the game as well. But anyway, guys, that's all for now. More of this will come soon, and take care.